What teacher picked the wrong student to bully? My best friend Alyssa was known at school for having severe social anxiety disorder. During the science fair, she set up her whole project, but then sat in the bathroom until it ended, getting a 0. This year during speech class, she stumbled while introducing herself. So our teacher, Mr. Blackberry, warned her, "I fail shy students like you all the time." She literally threw up in the bathroom sink after class. But then something happened. I saw her staring at her reflection, whispering, "I'll show him." Sadly, my autism made speaking up impossible, so I was forced to watch as everything unfolded. During the week, Alyssa seemed like a whole new person. She greeted people in the hallways, practiced talking to strangers. The first time she volunteered to answer a question in class, everyone was blown away. Even Mr. Blackberry said, "See, you just needed to be pushed." When we were handed an assignment, a 5-minute speech about the ethics of free speech, Alyssa smiled confidently, already making plans to practice at home and perform it in advance in front of parents and friends. The day of the assignment arrived and each student went up to present their opinion. Mr. Blackberry had been oddly quiet, jotting down mistakes while they spoke. When Alyssa's turn came, she made it 2 sentences before freezing completely. Just stood there shaking while Mr. Blackberry tapped his pen impatiently. The tension in the room seemed to affect everyone. Eventually, he just stood up and said, "One last chance. Friday, don't waste my time again." After that, Alyssa disappeared during lunch. I found her once in a bathroom stall, whispering her speech to the wall with tears staining her cheeks. She dumped anxiety pills in her shaking hands and ate them like they were Tic Tacs. Friday's speech class arrived and everyone felt more nervous than the first day of class. Alyssa walked to the front like she was heading to her execution. Her hands trembled as she began. Mr. Blackberry started to torment her immediately. "Too quiet, project." She raised her voice. "Now you're shouting. Control yourself." She tried to adjust. "Boring. Where's the passion? Speak faster." Then immediately, "Stop rushing." He clicked his pen aggressively and grinded his teeth. "Stop staring at the board. Look at your audience." When she looked at us, "Stop staring at them like a creep." He stood up and walked closer. "Are you even saying words? This is gibberish." He turned to the class. "Can anyone understand this mess?" No one responded. "Your hands are shaking so much it's distracting. Put them behind your back." When she did, "Now you look like a criminal. God, this is painful to watch." He laughed. "I've seen kindergartners with more composure. What are you, 5 years old?" The final blow came with a sneer. "You look like you really want to fail my class. Maybe some people just aren't meant to be heard." Alyssa stood there with tears streaming down her face. The whole room went silent. She walked back to her seat, completely broken. I saw her grip her desk, knuckles white, staring at nothing. Mr. Blackberry called up Amir, the kid who never did homework. Amir shuffled up nervously. He'd just watched Alyssa get destroyed. His hands shook as he held his wrinkled notes. So like free speech is like," Amir started. "Speak up," Mr. Blackberry barked. Amir flinched. Free speech is important because you're stuttering worse than the last one. What is this, a support group for the speech impaired?" Amir's face went red. "I'm trying my best." Trying? Mr. Blackberry stood up. "You know what, Amir? At least Alyssa practiced. You can't even form a coherent sentence. Did you even prepare? Or did you think you could just wing it like everything else?" I prepared." "Oh, really? Then why are you reading from your phone? Can't even memorize 5 minutes of content?" Pathetic. That's when something in Alyssa snapped. "Stop!" She shot up from her desk. "Just stop!" Everyone turned to stare. Alyssa's whole body was shaking, but not from anxiety this time. From rage. "He's doing his best. We're all doing our best. Sit down, Alyssa, or what? You'll fail me? You already did." She was screaming now. "You don't teach, you just tear people down. You're not making us better speakers, you're giving us trauma." Tara stood up. "She's right. This isn't teaching. You made her cry for enjoying it." Jasmine joined in. "You called me stupid last week for mispronouncing a word," Thomas added. One by one, the entire class stood up. "You told me I'd never amount to anything. You laughed at my accent." The room erupted. 23 students all shouting about how Mr. Blackberry had humiliated them. "Enough!" Mr. Blackberry slammed his hand on the desk. "Everyone who's standing gets an F. Sit down!" But Alyssa walked to the front instead. She put her hand on Amir's shoulder. "Go sit down. You did great." Then she turned to Mr. Blackberry. "You want to hear someone project? Fine." She faced the class. "Who thinks Mr. Blackberry should be the one getting graded?" The roar of agreement shook the windows. But Alyssa wasn't done. She pulled out her phone and showed us something that made even Mr. Blackberry's face go white. Turns out she'd been recording a lot more than just today. The video on her phone screen showed a kid from last semester standing at the front of the room. His whole body shook as he tried to get words out through his stutter. Mr. Blackberry's voice cut through the recording clear as day. "You're wasting oxygen trying to speak." The classroom went completely silent. Everyone stared at the phone as more clips played. A girl crying while presenting about her dead grandma. Mr. Blackberry laughing at her weakness. Another kid getting called worthless for mixing up words. Each recording had dates and times labeled perfectly. Mr. Blackberry's face went from white to purple in seconds. He lunged forward toward Alyssa's phone but caught himself halfway. His fists clenched so tight his knuckles cracked. "Recording without permission is illegal." His voice shook with rage. "I'm calling the police right now." He reached for his desk phone. Jasmine jumped up and grabbed her backpack. She pulled out the student handbook and flipped through pages fast. Page 47 says we can record for personal educational purposes. Her hands trembled as she read. Other kids started checking their phones. Thomas had clips from when he practiced speeches. Maria found recordings she made for homework. Everyone had something. Mr. Blackberry slammed the phone down so hard it bounced. The bell rang, but nobody moved. We all just sat there frozen. Get out! Mr. Blackberry screamed. Everyone out now! Kids started grabbing their stuff and rushing for the door. Alyssa's hands shook so bad she dropped her phone. It hit the floor with a crack. I scrambled to help her pick it up while other students formed a circle around us. They blocked Mr. Blackberry from getting close. We pushed through the door into the hallway together. Word spread faster than I'd ever seen. Kids from other classes crowded around asking what happened. Someone had already posted about it online. People kept asking Alyssa for copies of the recordings. She looked ready to pass out from all the attention. Her face went pale and she started breathing too fast. I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the bathroom. We ducked inside and locked ourselves in a stall. Alyssa sat on the closed toilet lid and showed me her phone screen. 27 different recordings filled a folder labeled Evidence. Each one had dates going back to the second week of school. She scrolled through and I saw titles like Called Me Stupid and Made Fun of Accent and Laughed at Crying. Some clips were over 10 minutes long. The worst ones made my stomach hurt just reading the descriptions. I pulled out my phone and started typing. We needed to tell someone official about this. Alyssa shook her head before I even finished typing. She told me she'd tried reporting him last year. The administration said he just had high standards. They suggested she transfer to a different class instead of dealing with it. Nothing ever happened to him. The bathroom door opened and Tara walked in. She found us immediately and squeezed into the stall with us. The new counselor, Claire Rivers, is really good, she said quietly. She helped my brother when kids were beating him up and the old counselor did nothing. Tara showed us her phone with Claire Rivers' email. I typed out a message right there. My fingers moved fast across the screen. I explained I couldn't speak, but my friend needed help with a serious classroom situation. I mentioned we had evidence. Alyssa watched me type and chewed her lip. She kept shaking her head like she didn't trust any adults anymore. But I hit send anyway. We stayed in the bathroom through most of fifth period. Other girls came in and out, whispering about what happened. Everyone had their own Mr. Blackberry horror story. One girl said he made her repeat a word 50 times because she said it wrong once. Another said he failed her for stuttering during a presentation about her parents' divorce. By the time we left for sixth period, the whole school knew something big went down. I checked my phone during math class. Claire Rivers had already responded. She had an opening in 20 minutes and could accommodate my communication needs. She said to bring any documentation we had. I showed Alyssa the message and she nodded slowly. But then texts started flooding in from kids in Mr. Blackberry's other classes. He was telling everyone that some students were trying to sabotage him. He said we couldn't handle constructive criticism. He called us weak and said we'd never survive in the real world. My stomach twisted into knots. He was already spinning the story to make himself the victim. Other teachers would believe him over us. They always did. Adults stuck together. More texts came in saying Mr. Blackberry was giving pop quizzes in all his classes. He was taking points off for every tiny mistake. One kid said he got a 0 for using blue ink instead of black. Another failed for writing the date wrong. He was punishing everyone because of what happened in our class. Kids were scared to even look at him wrong. The 20 minutes until our meeting felt like hours. Lunch finally came and Alyssa couldn't stop shaking, her whole body trembling so bad she couldn't even hold her sandwich. I reached over and grabbed her hand under the table, squeezing 3 times in our pattern we'd practiced since middle school when her anxiety first got bad. 3 squeezes meant you're safe, and she squeezed back twice for I know, but her hand kept shaking anyway. My phone buzzed with Claire Rivers' response saying she had a slot in 20 minutes and could work with my communication needs, adding that other students had already told her something was happening in Mr. Blackberry's class. We walked to her office together, Alyssa gripping my arm so tight it hurt, and when we got there, Claire had tissues ready on her desk and a notepad out for me to write on if I needed it. Alyssa pulled out her phone with shaking fingers and started playing the recordings. First the one from 3 weeks ago where Mr. Blackberry told a kid with a stutter he was wasting oxygen trying to speak. Claire's face went from concerned to serious as she scribbled down the date and asked who else heard it. The second recording was worse. Mr. Blackberry laughing at a girl for crying during her presentation about her dead grandmother, calling her weak and pathetic. Claire stopped writing and just stared at the phone. The third one made her stand up and close her office door completely. Mr. Blackberry screaming at a kid that he'd never amount to anything because he couldn't pronounce certain words right. I typed on my phone about how this had been going on all semester and showed Claire my notes with dates and names of other victims. She read through everything carefully, then picked up her desk phone and said this needed immediate administrative involvement, that the anti-retaliation policy would protect us from any punishment. She called Assistant Principal Raj Whitaker and told him to come right away, that it was urgent. Raj showed up in 5 minutes looking annoyed until Claire played him one recording and his whole face changed. He sat down and listened to all 3 recordings without saying anything, just taking notes with this poker face that made it impossible to know what he was thinking. When the recordings finished, he asked if we were willing to make formal statements and explained that all grades in Mr. Blackberry's classes would be frozen during the investigation, so nobody could be punished. Alyssa nodded and I typed yes on my phone. Raj said he'd send an official email by tomorrow morning and that we should document everything we could remember with specific dates and witnesses. That evening after dinner, I set up a shared Google Drive folder and started organizing everything, creating separate documents for each incident with columns for date, witnesses, and what happened. My autism makes talking hard, but organizing information is something I'm really good at. And within an hour, I had 13 different incidents sorted chronologically with all the evidence attached. I sent the link to other kids from class, and they started adding their own recordings and notes. Alyssa's parents found out when the school called them, and they freaked out, telling her she was making herself a target and should just drop the whole thing and transfer classes. Her mom kept saying it wasn't worth the stress, and her dad worried about college recommendations if she got labeled a troublemaker. But Alyssa stood up from the dinner table and told them she was done being silent and afraid, that even if they wouldn't support her, she was going through with this. Her mom cried and her dad slammed his hand on the table, but Alyssa went to her room and didn't come back out. The next morning, my phone buzzed with Raj's email to all of Mr. Blackberry's students saying grades were frozen pending review of teaching methods, and nobody's GPA would be affected by any recent assignments. Kids in the hallway were actually smiling for the first time in weeks, talking about how they could finally breathe without worrying about their grades tanking. Then Mr. Blackberry sent his own email an hour later about maintaining academic rigor and reminding everyone that attendance was still mandatory and participation would be noted. The threat was obvious even though he tried to sound professional, but Claire had told us to save everything, so I screenshotted it immediately. She said written threats were actually better evidence than verbal ones because nobody could deny them. At lunch the next day, Molly Walton from the school newspaper came up to our table with her recorder and asked if anyone would go on record about what was happening. Alyssa shook her head immediately, not ready for that kind of attention, but she told Molly she could provide background information if her name wasn't used. Molly sat down and started taking notes while Alyssa explained the pattern of abuse without naming specific victims, and I typed additional context on my phone for Molly to read. Molly's pen flew across her notebook while she read my screen and asked if we had any physical proof besides recordings, so I pulled up the Google Drive on my laptop and showed her the timestamps on everything. Study hall came next, and I spent the whole period sorting through messages from 13 different kids who wanted their stories included in the documentation, each one describing something awful Mr. Blackberry had done to them over the past 2 years. Maria's statement about him mocking her lisp made my stomach hurt. Kevin wrote about getting an F for coughing during his presentation. Sarah described him calling her too dumb to teach in front of everyone. The pattern was so obvious when you saw it all laid out in the spreadsheet I was building with dates and witnesses for each incident. I color-coded everything by severity and added links to any recordings or emails we had as backup evidence. By the time the bell rang, I had 3 pages of organized data that nobody could argue with. The next morning before speech class, Alyssa met me in the hallway, and her whole body was shaking worse than I'd ever seen it, her breathing coming in these short gasps that meant a panic attack was starting. Claire must have been watching for us because she appeared immediately and pulled Alyssa into an empty classroom, sitting her down in a chair and kneeling in front of her. She showed Alyssa this breathing thing where you breathe in for 4 counts, hold it for 4, breathe out for 4, then hold again for 4, making a box pattern with your breathing. Alyssa's hands gripped the desk while she tried to follow along, and after about 10 rounds her breathing started to slow down, and the shaking got less intense. Claire stayed with us until 5 minutes before class, reminding Alyssa that an administrator would be watching today, and Mr. Blackberry couldn't do anything with a witness there. We walked into speech class to find Assistant Principal Stevens sitting in the back corner with a clipboard and Mr. Blackberry standing at the front with his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. He assigned us silent reading from the textbook and didn't call on anyone to present, just paced back and forth while we all pretended to read but really watched him trying not to explode. Every time someone shifted in their seat or cleared their throat, his head would snap toward them and his hand would twitch toward his red pen, but then he'd glance at Stevens and force himself to look away. The whole period felt like sitting next to a bomb that might go off any second. That evening, my phone started blowing up with messages from kids who graduated last year, and 3 of them had stories that made everything we'd documented look mild in comparison. This girl named Ashley sent a 2-page email about presenting her grandmother's eulogy as her final speech project, and Mr. Blackberry laughing at her when she started crying, telling her that real speakers don't let emotions control them, while she stood there sobbing about her dead grandma. Another kid described getting detention for asking to use the bathroom during presentations, because professionals hold it. The worst one came from a boy who said Mr. Blackberry failed him for stuttering even though he had a documented speech impediment with an IEP that required accommodations. I forwarded everything to Claire and Raj immediately. 2 days later, Raj sent out an email saying he needed to interview each of us individually, and that everything had to follow specific union rules so the investigation couldn't get thrown out on some technicality. The bureaucracy made me want to scream because it meant everything would take weeks instead of days. But Claire explained in her office that if we didn't do everything exactly right, Mr. Blackberry could claim he was railroaded and get the whole thing dismissed. She pulled up the teacher's union contract on her computer and showed us all the steps that had to happen in exactly the right order, with the right documentation at each stage. Meanwhile, people online started talking about what was happening, and not all of it was supportive. Some anonymous account posted that Alyssa was just looking for attention and couldn't handle the real world if she thought this was abuse. Another said we were soft and needed to toughen up instead of crying to administrators every time a teacher challenged us. I stayed up until 3 in the morning writing this long post that just listed facts without any emotion or opinion, date by date, incident by incident, with 17 different examples of Mr. Blackberry crossing the line from tough to cruel. My post got 300 shares by morning, and kids from other schools started commenting that they wished someone would document their terrible teachers the same way. The school's Reddit page turned into this massive thread of people adding their own experiences with Mr. Blackberry going back 5 years, each story worse than the last. Alyssa texted me that her parents were freaking out about her name being all over social media and wanted her to delete everything, but she'd already decided to stay anonymous in any official reports or news coverage so the focus would stay on Mr. Blackberry's behavior instead of her anxiety, making her an easy target for people to dismiss. During my interview with Raj the next week, I brought my laptop with all my typed notes organized in folders and subfolders with timestamps and cross-references, and he actually smiled when he saw how detailed everything was, saying my written testimony was better than most verbal statements because I couldn't forget details or get flustered by questions. He asked me to walk through each incident chronologically while he typed up his official report, and I used my phone's text-to-speech to answer his follow-up questions without the stress of trying to force words out. 3 days after that, Alyssa was walking to her car after school when Mr. Blackberry appeared next to her in the parking lot, saying he wanted to clear up any misunderstandings before things went any further, and maybe they could work something out that would be better for everyone. Alyssa's hand went straight to her phone in her pocket and started recording while she backed away toward her car, telling him she couldn't talk about ongoing investigations, but he kept following her, saying she was ruining his career over a personality conflict, and asking if she really wanted to be known as the girl who couldn't handle constructive criticism. She managed to get in her car and lock the doors while he stood there still talking through the window until she drove away. Then she went straight to Claire's office with the recording and reported it as witness intimidation, which Claire said was a serious violation that would be added to his file immediately. That same night, Molly posted her article on the school website with a title about teaching methods that needed review, and within an hour the comment section had over 50 responses from students sharing their own stories about Mr. Blackberry making them cry or quit trying. I watched the comments pile up while sitting at my computer, refreshing the page every few minutes and seeing more kids from different periods adding their experiences. The next morning my phone buzzed with a group text from Tara saying her mom had read the article and was calling other parents, and by lunch we heard that at least 12 parents had emailed the principal demanding answers about what was happening in our class. One parent who worked as a lawyer sent an email that Raj later showed us, using words like hostile learning environment and potential liability, which made the principal schedule an emergency meeting for that afternoon. I saw Alyssa in the hallway between classes and noticed her hands shaking worse than usual, dropping her books twice while trying to get them from her locker. Claire found us and walked Alyssa to the nurse's office where they called her mom about adjusting her anxiety medication because the stress was making her current dose not work right anymore. The nurse gave her something to help calm her down for the rest of the day, while Claire stayed with her, making sure she ate lunch and drank water. That afternoon, we all got our graded homework back from Mr. Blackberry, and every single paper had red marks all over it with grades of D or F, even on work that he'd given us B's on just last week. Thomas held up his essay that had gotten a B- before, and now had an F with a note saying it lacked proper structure and clear arguments. Jasmine's presentation notes that she'd gotten an A on were now marked as failing for not having enough detail. Everyone started taking pictures of their old grades versus the new ones, creating more evidence of him trying to punish us. Raj sent out an email within an hour reminding everyone that the grade freeze was still in effect, and these new grades wouldn't count toward our final scores, but we should keep all the papers as evidence. I spent that evening going through the online gradebook and copying all the data into a spreadsheet, noticing that Mr. Blackberry's class average was 62%, while the other speech teachers had averages between 78 and 85%. The pattern went back 3 years, showing that his students always did worse than other teachers' classes, which wasn't normal for the same subject with the same curriculum. I organized all the data into charts and graphs, then sent them to Raj with a note explaining what I'd found. The next day, Raj called Alyssa and me to his office to tell us that the district office was now involved and had assigned their own investigator to look into everything, which meant the process would take several more weeks, but would be more thorough. He looked tired and said this was bigger than just our class now, with former students coming forward and the district worried about lawsuits. Some kids in our class started talking about transferring to other speech sections, saying they couldn't handle being in that room anymore, even with the investigation happening. I sent a group text that night explaining why we needed to stay together, that having witnesses in the room was important if this went to a formal hearing, and that leaving would make it look like we were giving up. Most of them agreed to stick it out, though I could tell everyone was exhausted from the constant stress of being in that class. Alyssa decided to record her statement for the investigators at home, where she could control everything, setting up her phone in her bedroom and taking breaks whenever she needed to calm down. She sent me the video afterward, and I helped her edit out the parts where she cried or had to stop, keeping just the clear parts where she explained what happened. The video was 12 minutes long when we finished, and she managed to explain everything that had happened without breaking down completely. Back in class on Monday, Mr. Blackberry had completely changed his behavior, speaking in this fake, sweet voice and only giving us basic worksheets to complete, instead of any actual speeches or presentations. He smiled at everyone and said please and thank you for everything, but we all sat there waiting for him to snap and go back to his old self. The worksheets were stuff we'd done in middle school, like filling in blanks about the parts of a speech or matching vocabulary words to definitions. Nobody trusted this new version of him, and you could feel the tension in the room with everyone staying quiet and just doing the work without talking. Claire announced she was running a workshop about managing anxiety that would meet twice a week after school, and almost our whole class signed up for it. The first session had 18 of us sitting in a circle in her office conference room, learning breathing exercises and ways to handle panic attacks. She taught us about something called grounding techniques, where you name 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste to help when anxiety gets too bad. We practiced together and talked about how we were all dealing with similar feelings from being in Mr. Blackberry's class, which made everyone feel less alone about struggling with it. 2 days later, Molly rushed up to me in the hallway holding her phone and showed me an email from someone named Sarah who graduated last year. Sarah wrote about how Mr. Blackberry made her cry every single class and how she had to go to therapy for 6 months just to stop having panic attacks about public speaking. The email had details about specific days when he told her she was too stupid to understand basic concepts, and how he made her repeat her name introduction 17 times because he said she wasn't pronouncing it clearly enough. Molly forwarded it to Claire and Raj right away, while I watched her fingers fly across her phone screen. That same afternoon, we all got official letters from the district saying someone named Emmanuel Dudley would be coming to interview us about the situation. The letter had this super formal language about maintaining professional standards and ensuring educational environments and a bunch of other stuff that basically meant they were taking this seriously now. Emmanuel showed up 3 days later wearing a dark blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than my whole wardrobe. He set up in the conference room and called us in one by one with a schedule that had 15-minute slots for each student. When my turn came, he pulled out a recording device and a yellow legal pad and explained that everything would be documented for the official investigation file. He asked really specific questions about dates and times and who else was in the room and what exact words were used. I typed my answers on my phone and showed them to him, and he copied everything down word for word without rushing me or acting impatient. He wanted to know about patterns of behavior and whether other teachers had witnessed anything, and if we had any written documentation like emails or graded papers with comments. After everyone got interviewed, we found out the school board had added something called instructional climate concerns to their next meeting agenda. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night at 7, and they said community members could speak during the public comment section if they signed up in advance. My hands shook when I read the email about it because speaking at a board meeting seemed way scarier than just talking to investigators. Claire found me in the library later and sat down next to me with her laptop open to the board meeting sign-up page. She explained that I could submit a written statement to be read out loud by the board secretary if I didn't want to speak myself, and that lots of people did it that way. We spent the next 2 days working on my statement in her office after school. She helped me organize all my thoughts into clear paragraphs that explained what I'd witnessed without getting too emotional or going off topic. My AAC device had a feature where I could pre-program longer messages, and she showed me how to use it as backup in case they asked me questions. We practiced different scenarios like what if they asked for more details, or what if they seemed skeptical, or what if Mr. Blackberry was there watching. Claire stayed calm and patient even when I got frustrated with how long everything took to type out. Meanwhile, Alyssa was preparing her own presentation with the recordings organized by date on her laptop. She asked 5 kids from our class to come to her house to practice, and they all showed up even though it was a Saturday. They sat in her living room while she went through her whole presentation and gave her feedback about which parts were strongest. Thomas suggested she play the worst recording first to grab their attention, and Jasmine helped her make a timeline chart showing all the incidents. They promised they'd all be at the board meeting to support us even if they didn't speak themselves. The night of the meeting arrived and the boardroom was packed with way more people than I expected. Parents sat in rows of metal folding chairs, and teachers stood along the walls, and reporters had cameras set up in the back corner. When they called Alyssa's name, she walked to the podium with her laptop and plugged it into their sound system. The first recording started playing, and you could hear Mr. Blackberry screaming at a kid about being worthless, and the whole room went dead quiet. She played 3 more clips while the board members' faces got more and more shocked, and one of them actually covered her mouth with her hand. Then the board secretary read my statement out loud in this monotone voice that somehow made it sound even worse because it was so matter-of-fact about all the horrible things that happened. Right after that, Mr. Blackberry's union representative stood up and started talking about how teachers need to maintain high standards, and how some students interpret constructive criticism as attacks. He had this whole prepared speech about academic rigor, and how the district shouldn't punish teachers for refusing to lower their expectations. Some board members nodded along, and one asked if maybe the students were being too sensitive about normal classroom management. The board voted to continue the investigation, but you could tell they weren't all convinced something bad had really happened. Over the next week, Emmanuel came back for follow-up interviews and brought a stack of papers for us to sign. He explained that any retaliation from Mr. Blackberry would result in immediate termination, and that the district had 0 tolerance for witness intimidation. He went through every single claim we'd made and matched it up with documentation, and asked for any additional evidence we might have forgotten to mention. Then on Friday morning, we walked into speech class and found a substitute teacher writing her name on the board. She turned around and smiled and said, "Mr. Blackberry was on administrative leave while the investigation continued, and she'd be taking over for now." Everyone started breathing normally for the first time in months, and some kids actually smiled at each other. The substitute introduced a new grading rubric that had clear expectations and points for effort and improvement, not just perfect performance. She said we could practice speeches as many times as we wanted before doing them for a grade, and that she'd give feedback without any judgment. Kids who hadn't volunteered once all semester suddenly raised their hands to go first. The substitute let us practice in small groups first, and Alyssa paired up with me while we worked on our presentations in the corner of the room. She kept her note cards in her shaking hands and started reading her speech about free expression while I timed her on my phone. Her voice cracked twice in the first 30 seconds, but she pushed through and made it to the 1-minute mark before stopping to take a deep breath. Claire walked in during third period and sat in the back row watching as Alyssa tried again from the beginning. This time, Alyssa looked right at Claire while she spoke, and her voice stayed steady through the whole introduction and first main point. She stumbled on a transition, but kept going, and finished the full 2 minutes without stopping or crying. Everyone in our practice group clapped when she sat down, and Claire gave her a thumbs up from the back. The substitute announced that anyone who wanted to could present using accommodations, and I raised my hand immediately. I spent lunch in the computer lab recording my speech on my phone in small chunks and editing them together into one audio file. The next day, I stood at the front holding my phone while my recorded voice played through the classroom speakers. When the recording ended, the substitute asked if anyone had questions, and I typed responses on my phone that the text-to-speech app read out loud. 3 kids asked about my sources, and I answered each one while everyone listened to the robotic voice without laughing or making faces. After 2 weeks, the principal called a special assembly and announced that the investigation had concluded with official findings. Mr. Blackberry would receive a formal reprimand in his file and had to complete 40 hours of classroom management training over the summer. He also had to have another teacher observe his classes twice a month for the next 2 years and submit lesson plans for approval. Some kids grumbled that he should have been fired, but at least there would be real oversight now. The following Monday, Mr. Blackberry walked back into our classroom holding a piece of paper and looking smaller than before. He stood at the front and read from the paper in a flat voice about maintaining professional standards and creating a supportive learning environment. He said he regretted any distress his teaching methods had caused and would be implementing new classroom policies going forward. Nobody believed he meant any of it, but at least he couldn't scream at us anymore with observers dropping in randomly. The principal sent out an email saying any student could redo assignments from the semester for a new grade with accommodations. Alyssa signed up immediately to do her full 5-minute speech and spent every lunch practicing with Claire in the counseling office. She made flashcards with transition phrases and practiced her breathing exercises between each main point. 2 weeks later, she stood at the front of the class holding her cards and looking at the timer on the desk. She got through her introduction and first 2 points without stopping, and her voice only shook a little on the 3rd point. At 4 minutes, she paused and took 3 deep breaths while we all stayed quiet and waited. She looked at Claire, who nodded, and then finished the last minute strong with her shoulders back and her voice clear. Everyone clapped softly and she walked back to her seat with tears running down her face, but she was smiling. Claire scheduled meetings with both of us to create support plans for next semester, and we sat in her office filling out forms about our accommodation needs. She helped me set up a system for using my AAC device in all my classes, and got approval for me to submit typed responses for any verbal assignments. Alyssa got extended time for presentations and permission to take breaks when she felt overwhelmed. We both signed up for weekly counseling sessions, and Claire gave us worksheets about coping strategies to practice at home. Our last speech class of the semester had a laminated poster on the wall listing respectful communication expectations, and the substitute made sure everyone followed them. She had us do partner presentations where we could support each other, and nobody had to stand alone at the front. I typed my final reflection about how speaking up doesn't always mean using your voice, and submitted it through the online portal. The substitute wrote back that my advocacy work had made real change, and future students would benefit from what we'd accomplished. Alyssa and I walked out of that classroom knowing we were stronger than when we'd started, even though the journey had been brutal. All right, that's gonna wrap it up for today. Really appreciate you hanging out and going through all those questions with me. It's always a good time just wondering about this stuff together. I'll catch you in the next one. Subscribe for more content like this.